the Toronto Star. I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. This is going to be a very different Halloween. And while we are lamenting what we might not be able to do in terms of trick-or-treating, we should take a moment and think about another set of our population that will also be missing out on the festivities.
The paranormal denizens of this city.
Toronto can be a very spooky town, and this city's population of ghosts, poltergeists, and unexplained phenomena will be losing their one night to shine bright, or perhaps better put, to darken our imaginations. So we think they should be celebrated. Today's treat for you is a chat with a man who knows this city's paranormal experiences and how they tie to our history. Bruce Bell is an actor, comedian, and historian who runs Bruce Bell Tours. He's here to talk about the Toronto tales of ghosts, ghouls, and all the things that go
bump in the night.
Bruce, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, Bruce, before we get to the ghosts, I just want to be clear about something. You are not a medium, but rather a historian, right?
Yes.
So we are going to talk about some scary tales, but we're going to also talk about the history behind them. And as a city, there's plenty of these stories, right?
Oh, yes. I would say every street. We all have our own personal, sightings in ourselves, but some of them over the couple of centuries, really have gotten into the psyche of, the ghost telling of Toronto. That we all have our stories, and they've been around forever.
I think I want to get to yours because I read about that you had an encounter. But the other thing that I want to talk about is the fact that I think that Toronto is a city that is not particularly good with its history. And I think the interesting thing is that some of these ghosts have stuck around in their new buildings, right?
They have. And even if we go back thousands of years, the people that, lived here and, of course, still do, First Nations, they had their own stories. They were living in dark forests. And then by the time the British came, they started telling their own stories. And the very first account that I've ever read here in Toronto of any sort of ghost storytelling happened in 1798 in a house that used to stand over at Sherbourne and Front. And a group of people got together and read these horror tales from this very popular book at the time called Children of the Abbey. And they sat around the fireplace and they told these ghost stories to each other. And that was the very first mention that I had of it. But it really wasn't until Frankenstein, 1816, that, books started to, come out here and people started to do readings in their homes. It seems people wanted to be scared, much like today. But again, these people were living in a time that had no electricity. You were walking at night, put your life into your own hands, even if you were going to visit your friend a few doors down. There was no gas lamps, in the early part of the 19th century. It really was quite, especially at winter, very dark, very scary. We were living in a forest. There were still wild animals coming into the town. It wouldn't become brightened up until about 1840, 1841, when the first gas lamps were lit. So we had all that time, to sit around and scare ourselves with stories.
Okay, that's a fantastic way to start. Let's start off with, I think, what is one of both of our favorite places. And I'll be honest, I've never felt scared there in my life, but St. Lawrence Market. I think there are a lot of stories. Can you tell me about a couple of them?
There was, we did actually an investigation. I'm the historian and tour guide at St. Lawrence Market. I've been doing tours there for the last 20 years. So about 2 years ago, I hired a paranormal team under the direction of Peter Rowe. These are professional, ghost hunters to the paranormal research investigation. And it was Halloween, and we invited about 50 people to come into the market at midnight. And there was about 8 paranormal investigators. They had all their equipment, all their machinery. They even hired a medium to come in and search for any activity that was there in the market, because the market is built over top of Toronto's first city hall, and there's an old prison in the basement. And that city hall was, built on top of an old dock. It's one of the most historic spots in all the city. So I figured, there might be something. Let's find out if there is. And there was always this story that I had heard about. Back in 1857, there was a great stock market crash. Everyone was putting money into the railroad, the bottom fell out, and it came down to the mayor of Toronto, John Hutchinson, that he had put a lot of his own money into the railway. He had heard there was going to be a good investment, and when the bottom fell out, they blamed him. And so on one dark, stormy night, John Hutchinson left the city hall in disgrace. He had to give up his office, he had to resign, and he was never seen again. They have no idea what happened to Toronto's, ironically, 13th mayor. And he was never heard from again. And so over the years, different people have told me who've worked at the market, they've always heard things, doors slamming and lights flickering, and said, is this John Hutchinson? Is he trapped somewhere in the remains of the old city hall? So in comes the investigators, and we spent all night in the market with their machinery, and they came up with 3 ghosts, 3 paranormal poltergeists that exist here in St. Lawrence Market. And their machines went quite crazy at the very front of the market. When you walk into the market, the medium too, she started getting a lot of energy. And it came down to that they believe it was a man named Trevor who died on the old dock, shipping dock that was there back in about 1840. He was murdered, and he's never left the scene. And when you walk into the market, if you ever feel a little blow on the back of your neck, someone blowing on you, that is the ghost of Trevor. So I found that absolutely fascinating. And these paranormal investigators, they are serious people. This was never done for fun at all. This was a very serious event. All the people who were invited, were very serious about this. And interestingly enough, when we went down to the old prison into the sub-basement, the chains are still on the walls down there. And that jail was built in 1844. They never found anything. There was nothing down there. There was no energy at all. And it's often said that jails are one of the last places a ghost would like to return to. It's not a happy place for a poltergeist. So there was nothing there. And the other 2 ghosts float around the butcher stalls at the very back of the market. And these poltergeists that they found at St. Lawrence Market date long before the market was built. They come from, the city hall days and when the docks were there, that all these 3 ghosts were poltergeists, were murdered men. So that's what we found out.
Great story. I love it. So, the funny thing is there's other things around that area, and the Gooderham and Worts Distillery District, I believe, has some ghosts too.
The Gooderham and Worts, James Worts, where the Worts comes from, and William Gooderham, they were brothers-in-law, and they arrived in Toronto 1832, and the Gooderham had 17 children and Worts had 15 children, and his wife died giving birth to their 16th child, and she was only 28 years old. She died leaving 15 children, and James Worts was so despondent that he threw himself into the well that he used to stand on the site at the Gooderham and Worts site there today, and said always that it's his ghost that can be seen in and around where that coffee shop is, Balzac, in and around that area. That's where most of the sightings of James Worts can be seen, because the well was around there. And they have ghost tours. I'm not sure if they're doing them now because of the pandemic, but they do ghost tours at the distillery, looking for James Worts' paranormal poltergeist.
We'll be right back. Let's talk about one of the most famous ghosts in the city. Who is Dorothy?
Oh, yes, Dorothy. Dorothy truly is, I think, the superstar of all ghosts. Most people who follow, ghosts know of Dorothy. And Dorothy was a teller at the Bank of Montreal, which is now the Hockey Hall of Fame. And in 1957, she found out that the man she was dating was, dating other women. And she was so despondent that she went up to the manager's office on the second floor and took the gun that he had in his desk, took it out, and shot herself and died on the second floor of what is now the Hockey Hall of Fame. And since then till now, people who go into the Hockey Hall of Fame, even if they don't even know the story, they know that the apparition of Dorothy, people say they see it. Sometimes she's wearing a blue dress or a whitish blue dress, and she floats around in the main hall, that she's never really left the Hockey Hall of Fame, that she's still there. It's as if she doesn't want to acknowledge that she was cheated upon, and so she's there today. And when you talk to people who work there, or you talk to anyone who works in a famous ghost place, there is always, yes, we saw slamming doors and lights flickering and squeaks on the staircase. And then when we tell people, they say, oh yeah, listen, you're in a very haunted place. This is Dorothy who's trying to communicate with you. So it's been going on for over 60 years. Poor old Dorothy.
There seems to be a lot of passion and spurn lovers with the ghosts.
Yes, again, most of these stories, the famous ghosts, the Christie Mansion.
I was just going to ask about that.
Was the son of Mr. Christie, kept a mistress locked up in the attic. And he had his own family downstairs, and he would go upstairs to be with his mistress, gave her everything she needed, to live, a little kitchen, and she had a little bedroom, and eventually he forgot about her and never visited her and just left her up there, and she ended up hanging herself. And he went up there and found her body and took it across the street and buried it in Queen's Park, and eventually was so guilt-ridden about the whole thing. I mean, they lost their business and they sold it to Nabisco. I mean, this was a huge story in the 1920s. And again, passion. And a lot of that has to do with, we come from a very Victorian society in the 19th century Toronto. Toronto was all secrets and lies. You never spoke of illicit love affairs. Like, you would never even whisper to even your best friend that you were seeing somebody. It's just not done. And so a lot of this was going on. It just, people were killing themselves in terrible, bad love triangles. Just everywhere that was going on. But it was all kept very hush-hush. And at that very same time, towards the end of the 19th century, séances were becoming huge. 68% of the people died in Toronto of infectious disease. The average lifespan was, in 1890, it was 40 years old. I mean, you could die of a common cold, of course, of the flu, which of course you still can today, but, getting a cut in the finger could kill you. And women in childbirth, a lot of children died. And so séances were a big business, fortune telling and séances. And everyone, would know someone who, had gone to a séance, and you wanted to go. It was the iPhone of the day. Everyone had to be part of it. So that also started a lot of this looking for spirits. Spirits constantly surround us. And it all really began here in Toronto with the coming of the Catholic Irish in the 1850s. They're the ones that introduced Halloween into our society. When the Irish wave in the 1850s came over, Toronto was a very British Protestant town. And by 1855, half the town was now Catholic Irish. And they lived over in Corktown and the old Cabbage Town. The city was divided, and a line going right through it, one side Protestant, the other side Catholic. So the Catholic Irish brought a lot of their traditions with them. And that's where Halloween started here in Toronto, in Corktown. And slowly it was working its way, into the Protestants. And the first reference that I find to Halloween in any book or old newspapers about 1898, when Halloween started to become more acceptable amongst the everyday people. And that was the rise of the seance, the rise of the spirits and all. That was, and this is again all before television. I mean, you really had to, to have a seance at your house was a big deal. Some people saw it as fun, and other people took it as very, very serious business. So that's this passion idea that I want to communicate with the person I love the most. And of course, you're going to believe that. If someone you lost died, you want to hear that. So that was all the rage back at the turn of the last century.
You mentioned love triangles. And one of the things that I think we wanted to tell people potentially is, if you can't go trick-or-treating this Halloween, maybe go for a walk. The story that I would like to talk about is the story of Ivan Resnikoff and Paul Diablos, because people can go and see some of their work, right? So tell us who they were and the love triangle.
This, again, the famous ghost triangle we have in the city. These two men, Reznikov and his partner there, were building the University College, the big tower that's there. They were stonemasons. They were working on it. And, one day they were hanging away and, cutting these stones. And, what'd you do last night? Oh, I went out with my girlfriend. Oh, that's great. What's her name? Mary. Huh, isn't that funny? My girlfriend's name is Mary. Oh, yes, my Mary has beautiful, long, black, flowing hair. Huh, so does mine. And as they're realizing that they're talking about the same woman. And so here was these two stonemason. Reznikov was, from Russia, and Diablo was from Greece. And so they were carving the gargoyles that still adorn the university there today. If you go and look up at the clock tower at these gargoyles, that's what they were working on. So when Reznikov found proof of his girlfriend's infidelity, he immediately confronted Diablos and a fight began on the construction site. And he took an axe and he chased Diablos through the unfinished building and taking swings at him. And even to this day, if you go to University College, the door on the far left still has the axe marks, huge axe marks that are still buried deep into that door. The duo end up high in the unfinished tower. Reznikov took a powerful swing, missed, and plummeted to his death. Now, Diablos buried Reznikov in the foundation of the building and vanished from Toronto. And he and the girlfriend were never heard from again. Now, years later, after a devastating fire in 1890, the remains of an unidentified man were unearthed at the college, thought to be Reznikov. Now, over the years, the apparition believed to be that of Ivan Reznikov, and reports of poltergeist activity in and around the connecting buildings have been cited by, students and staff at the University of Toronto. And every year, every Halloween, hundreds of people show up for the U of T's annual ghost tours at University College as the main attraction. Now, of course, all of this is myth and legend, and like all ghost stories, it's been added to over the years. Now, the other ghost at the same site, on February 14th in 1890, the night of the annual student ball, a fire broke out in the southeast corner of University College when a maid carrying a tray of lit kerosene lamps tripped and it fell to the ground, and fire broke out and destroyed most of University College's interior. However, the stone exterior structure remained intact, and it was during the restoration that bones were found alleged to be Reznikov's. And to this day, one of the apparitions people go in search of is believed to be that of the maid who accidentally started the fire. So these apparitions, you get to see the maid is still there. She still wanders around the back, and Reznikov wanders around the front. They might even come together at some point. So those are really the two most famous ghosts at the University of Toronto.
I was going to ask about another famous Canadian. What is going on at William Lyon McKenzie House?
There's always been, since day one, ghost stories of William Lyon McKenzie. He was Toronto's first mayor. He was the leader of the rebellion of 1837 when he rose up against the British to have this mini revolution that really went nowhere. But when his grandson became Canada's Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, in the 1920s, it was always said that William Lyon Mackenzie King was always into séances. He was always speaking to his dead mother, who was the daughter of Mackenzie, of McKenzie House. And he would often, as Prime Minister, drive down Bond Street, where the house is still to this day. When he would drive down in the 1940s, that house rumored to be a brothel. There were stories of the Prime Minister at the time visiting a brothel, but actually he was going there looking for his grandfather, having seances and speaking to his mother. The story goes, his mother would say, well, go to the house, you will see him in the top window. So that really stuck. So that, too, is also very much, you'll see people standing outside McKenzie House on Bond Street looking up at the third window to the right. And that's where you could get a shot. You could see Toronto's first mayor up there in the window.
Still looking down on us. Bruce, I think this is going to be a very, very different Halloween, but I think this is going to be a fun way for us to celebrate and remember some of the spooky times in the city. I want to thank you so much for your time today.
Real pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bruce Bell is an actor, comedian, and historian who runs Bruce Bell Tours. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Mudler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etizaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.